Although using found objects in artworks was by no means a new idea, it gave rise to distinct genres in the 1960s and 70s, making it a very creative period. There were also some sharp divisions in the art world, with a gulf widening between popular and serious culture. Origins and influences. Artworks made from found objects appeared as early as 1936 in the work of Joseph Cornell, and by the time Jean Dubuffet coined the term assemblage in 1953, it had become an established art form. Collage was an influence on early assemblages, and there was also a precedent in the ready-mades of Marcel Duchamp, an idea taken further in Robert Rauschenberg's Combine paintings, for which the critic Lawrence Alloway coined the term junk art in 1961. Techniques. Moving away from the traditional genres of painting and sculpture, assemblage and junk artists created hybrid three-dimensional forms by assembling discarded objects and scrap materials in boxes, freestanding constructions, or installations. Sometimes they even presented the objects without modification, but in a new setting, out of context. Land art, also known as earth art, developed in the 1970s and drew inspiration both from the natural environment and its raw materials. Rather than depicting a landscape, land artists worked directly on the landscape itself, sculpting it to make earthworks, or building structures and installations with natural materials, such as branches or rocks. Wrapped cans. Part of inventory Christo Jeanne-Claude, 1959-60. At the forefront of the junk art movement, Christo began wrapping everyday objects, such as these enamel paint tins, in the late 1950s, and later adapted his wrapping techniques to create large-scale land art. Assemblage, junk and land art. Timeline. Joseph Cornell produced his first boxed assemblages in the 1930s, but it was another 2 decades before the genre was established. Elements of collage reappeared in early pop art in the late 1950s and developed further in the 1960s in Kienholz's tableaus, then in the junk art sculptures by Cesare Baldaccini and John Chamberlain. In the 1970s, land artists such as Smithson left the studio and worked on the land to create artworks. 1964, Cornell, The Sixth Dawn. 1964, Kienholz, While Visions of Sugar Plums Danced in Their Heads. 1988, Long Sahara Line. 1988, Goldsworthy, Spherical Leaf Work. 1995, Christo and Jeanne-Claude, Wrapped Reichstag. Art of Recycling. Because they were made from everyday materials and bits of rubbish, assemblage and junk art sometimes evoked a mood of nostalgia, but they also highlighted the wastefulness of consumer society and rejected the commercialism of pop art. This implicit social commentary became more overt throughout the 1960s and 70s. Land art, in particular, also sought to raise awareness of man's place in both the natural and urban environments. Assemblage and junk art. The terms assemblage and junk art are to some extent interchangeable, but generally speaking refer to stages of the same movement. The principle of arranging found objects and debris remained essentially the same. Primarily an urban art form, assemblage had its roots in New York, where Joseph Cornell's idea of boxed objects was adopted by Louise Nevelson and extended in Edward Kienholz's tableaus. Junk art, meanwhile, spread quickly from New York across America, and appeared in Europe at about the same time. The arte povera, poor art, movement in Italy was similar in philosophy, influencing Alberto Burri, Pino Pascali, and Mario Merz, and in France, César was producing scrap metal sculpture along much the same lines as John Chamberlain in the United States. Land art. In some ways, land art was an even less conventional movement, creating art outside galleries or public spaces, in the context of the natural world. Often this was done on a massive scale, particularly in the open spaces of North America where it could only be seen properly from the air. But it was also taken up by European artists such as Andy Goldsworthy in the more intimate settings of woodland and seashore, using leaves, twigs, and stones. Land artists also occasionally produced their work in galleries, by creating installations made from materials taken from the landscape. An urban variation of land art can be seen in the work of Christo and Jeanne-Claude, whose nouveau realism technique of wrapping household objects progressed to wrapping up historic buildings, and then parts of landscapes. As well as challenging the notion of art as exhibits divorced from the outside world, land art explores the effects of time and decay. Many of these ephemeral creations have disappeared due to natural erosion. The impermanence of land art, which mainly survives only in photographs or video records, links the movement to similar ideas in conceptual and process art. Stones and Stars 2003. Working outdoors and using the raw materials of the landscape itself, land artists such as Richard Long reflect the continuing concerns of the environmentalist movement of the 1970s and 80s. 2003. Photograph and text, 87.5 by 129 centimeters. Compression César Baldacchini. In contrast to the recycled ephemera and trivia of assemblage, junk art uses waste material as its basic medium, especially the discarded debris of industrial society, such as the crushed car parts of César's Compression series. See 1960, Mixed Media, Kunsthal, Hamburg, Germany. Christo and Jeanne-Claude. By Bruni Maya. Christo, Biga Bravo, 1935. Jean-Claude, B. Casablanca, 1935. Christo escaped from Bulgaria while visiting Prague, eventually settling in Paris where, in 1958, he met Jean-Claude. Since 1961, the two of them have worked on a number of ambitious, large-scale works of art, which often involve years of negotiation and planning, and the collaboration of many workers and agencies. They commonly use fabric to create forms that interact with an already existing environment, for example, by wrapping buildings or bridges. Projects may take years and much effort to realize, but the works themselves are always temporary, making them unique but ephemeral, aesthetic, and interactive experiences, rather than enduring monuments. Unlike most land artists, Christo and Jean-Claude do not work in remote locations, but in populated areas where their art will be experienced firsthand and free of charge by large numbers of people. Lifeline. 1935. Christo and Jean-Claude are born on the same day, June 13, 1957. Christo, studying in Prague, escapes communist Europe in a medicine truck. 1958. Christo and Jean-Claude meet in Paris. 1961. First collaborative work, wrapping oil barrels with tarpaulin in Cologne harbor. 1968. The couple wrapped their first public building, the Kunsthal in Bern. 1985. Pont Neuf Bridge in Paris is wrapped in fabric. 1995. Their 24-year project to wrap Berlin's Reichstag is realized. Surrounded Islands. Christo and Jean-Claude have said that they wish to create works of art of joy and beauty. In this aesthetically exuberant piece, 11 small islands in Biscayne Bay, Miami, were surrounded by luminous, shiny, pink, floating fabric. 1983. Miami, U.S. Wall of oil barrels, Iron Curtain. The artist's first major public intervention was an unauthorized protest against the Berlin Wall, which had been built the previous year. 240 oil barrels created a wall of colored circles across the narrow Rue Visconti in Paris, blocking traffic for 8 hours. 1962. Oil barrels, Paris, France. Wrapped Reichstag. The project to wrap Berlin's Reichstag began in 1971, but was not finally realized until 1995, about midway between Germany's reunification and the reuse of the building as the seat of parliament. Over a 2-week period, 5 million visitors experienced the enigma of this familiar landmark transformed into a solid abstraction of flowing drapery. 1995. Fabric, Berlin, Germany. We only create joy and beauty. We have never done a sad work. Christo, 2002.